Okay. All right. So this panel, if you'll notice, we don't have any athletes here on this panel.
Although of a sort.
I did play pickleball earlier. Okay, and I'm undefeated. But really, this is about news, and I think it's a subject that's personally near and dear to my heart. What's going on with news? What's going on with readership? What's happening with advertising? Are we accidentally demonetizing news? That's why this panel is here to hear, moderated by Sara Fischer and three of the most distinguished CEOs in journalism today. So, Sara?
Thank you, Mark. And just so everyone is aware, we're here because Mark and the folks at Stagwell have done some incredible research on sort of news and advertising and how marketers are aligning themselves against news. And so that's part of what we wanted to talk about today. We are joined by Mark Thompson, the CEO of the New York Times, Barbara Peng, CEO of CNN. I'm so sorry, CEO of CNN. Barbara Peng, the CEO of Business Insider, and Meredith Kopit-Levien, the CEO of the New York Times. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it. So, Mark, just set the stage for us. What is some of the research that you did? What did you find in terms of the advertising relationship with news and how it's shifted?
Sure. And let me just go back a little bit in time to when I was in charge of what was then about a $2 billion budget at Microsoft. And I said, what are we advertising on news? And they said, well, zero. And I said, well, why is that? And they really didn't have a coherent answer. So I said, well, run your computer models. And they came back and said, well, we should be actually advertising about 20% on news. So sure enough, we changed it. And then a few months later, I checked back. I said, what are some of the best performing sites that we have? And they said, well, the news sites are best performing. And it was logical because news consumers are information consumers. And so consequently, they also use technology to consume information. So it made sense to me. As soon as I left, they put it back to zero. So I saw this was a wider trend. So we did a study, and we took 10 different ads. We took 10 different situations, sports news, entertainment news, a Hamas story, a Biden story, a Trump story. We did 50,000 interviews, and we scored the ads against, how they did in each one of these situations. And there was a very slight difference in ad performance, but in no ad was there a negative brand glow. This idea that brands face negativity for being advertised in the middle of news simply has no weight whatsoever. And we found the differential between how the ads performed to be on the order of 1%, 2%, or 3%. So this study, it's available, it's online, it's everywhere, it's documented. It really should explode this idea that there's something wrong with advertising on news.
And also, Mark, just so everyone here is aware, several of the panelists, including myself, our companies were a part of that study. I just want to make sure that's disclosed. And I also want to make sure it's disclosed that I'm a contributor for CNN before I ask you questions. So, Mark Thompson, Mark Penn is describing a really interesting data point, which is that advertisers shouldn't be skittish around news. But we see it here at Cannes. It's not just that they're skittish, they also have so much competition now. We have competition now. And I think as such, news publishers are thinking about subscriptions. CNN has been, you've been pretty vocal about wanting to bring subscriptions to CNN. Is that going to be like a consumer subscription? Is that going to be like a business subscription? What do you envision that looking like, and when is it coming?
Sure. So we haven't announced anything. Your first point about news, here we are at the sport beach. Sport feels very hot at the moment for all sorts of good reasons. I do think it's worth saying that although I think it would be great if brands looked at Mark's Stagwell research and reconsidered news, I think as publishers and broadcasters, we've also got to do quite a lot of work, I think, in making sure that the way we present our products, the opportunities we offer people, offer advertisers for adjacencies fit with their needs. So I think we've got some work to do at CNN we're thinking hard about verticals. We've got a very big position in health, longevity, and living fit and well. That's a great topic, and if we had more regularity and clarity about that content, we hope we can get some brands to associate with that. Tech reporting, entertainment reporting, sports reporting. So I think there's things we can do to put our own houses in order. But I do think the fundamental insight, which is that the vague conjecture that being bad, being close to tough news of some sort is necessarily bad for a brand, doesn't seem to be true. In other words, audiences can distinguish, and they so that I believe all of that. On digital subscriptions, I don't see CNN ever being at a point where we want to move from advertising to a subscription model. I think it is likely, though, that we will want to look at direct-to-consumer subscription. In other words, appealing directly to individual. We've got about 170 million unique users every month. We're a very big, by most measures, the biggest single digital news presence in the world, in the free world. We've got about 17 to 20 million really engaged users, and we are exploring whether or not there's a direct-to-consumer opportunity for them. But again, this is going to be about getting even better at engagement and time spent and frequency. And I think that group of people we've now launched the registration model, so our first-party data is getting better. And the hope is that over time, we can identify a really attractive, very strongly engaged, as it were, sort of tenured and qualified news audience who I think could be very attractive to advertisers as well.
Can I just clarify something? You had mentioned a few of the verticals where CNN has authority: technology, wellness, obviously politics, national security. Is the idea that you were trying to say that one day you would do a subscription that centers around people there, or ad adjacencies?
No, I'm talking about adjacencies mainly. So if, for example, there was a brand new that coming into a break in a given primetime show, or a digital environment devoted to the vertical, they knew what the adjacency was going to be. They knew they were going to be next to Sanjay Gupta talking on TV about what can extend your life, or a piece by Sanjay or video from Sanjay on the website. They would know what they were going to be near to. We understand that there's going to be a range of different brands with different needs, and that some of them, particularly in certain endemic categories, will be more interested in being adjacent to a particular topic rather than general news. We understand that.
Yes. Meredith, it's interesting. What Mark is describing reminds me a little bit of the Time strategy, in which you are now subscription first, but your ad business is bolstered by the fact that you can prove to those advertisers that these are highly engaged users. Can you explain how that flywheel is working at the Times?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And let me start by saying a little bit to Mark Penn's point. I think the consumer, I think everyone understands that a consumer has like a kaleidoscope of interest, and particularly a New York Times reader, watcher, user, listener comes to us with really varied interest. And the people, our whole game is, can we get you to pay? Can we get you to stay a paying customer? Can we get you to pay more over time? And the best way for us to do that is to get you to engage across that multiplicity of interest. And the more the New York Times has been able to answer in really rich, deep ways to a variety of interests, the better our business has gone, the better our subscriber business has gone, the better our ad business has gone. And let me give a little bit of dimension to that. And Mark, you and I were chatting about, Mark Penn, you and I were chatting about this earlier. To me, the case to a marketer of why advertise with any of our properties is just not just the giant scale of audience, which we certainly have, but also how culturally relevant our work is. You know, I can't get on a plane now and not see many, many people as I walk down the aisle of that plane playing Wordle or Connections or Spelling Bee or Strands. You know, if you care about fashion, you probably tuned into the New York Times live briefing on the Met Gala to see who was wearing what. And if you care about the NBA Finals, you probably followed that on The Athletic. And that's not to mention if you care about the war in Ukraine, which drags on after, 2.5 years, or the war in Gaza, or geopolitics, or American politics, you're coming to the New York Times. And the most engaged subscribers, the people who we target for marketers, are coming to us with that wide variety of interest, and they are coming to us with a really active mind. And Mark Thompson raised the point of a registration model. The Times has had a model now for 6-7 years where we ask you to register if you want to do anything of merit. You don't have to pay. We've got 10.5 million paying subscribers and somewhere between 50 and 100 million weekly users on the Times. We have 150 million registrations. That means for marketers, we know a lot about the subscribers, and we know a lot about the people who just come and read and engage, and we can target them more effectively. And so what I would say is the core of our ad business is a steady grower because of that. And as we extend very high-powered, kind of beautiful canvas, high-performing ad products beyond news, and we extend them to sports and recipes and shopping advice and games, we think we've got a really wide proposition to marketers that's fairly unique in the market in terms of the number of people they can reach, how they can be targeted, and across what dimensions of their life.
Definitely interesting on the scale, for sure. Barbara, Business Insider has been through a number of evolutions. At one point when I covered you, the idea was to move more things behind the paywall. Then the idea was to pull things out from behind the paywall. You have eMarketer, that's like a professional paywall. Can you walk us through what is your business model now that you've rebranded, now that you're in this new era? Is it a subscription-first company? Is it an advertising-first company? Where do you stand?
Thank you, Sara. And first, let me say, very excited to be here with all of you. So when last fall, when I stepped into the CEO role, I announced a new way forward. We returned to Business Insider. We refocused our journalism on our core strengths of business, tech, and innovation, and very much, learned a lot about our audience, what they love and want more from us, and very much really focused on, how can we drive deeper, longer-term relationships, very much from what you're bringing up, Meredith, very similar. So I do have to say, with that announcement, coming back to Business Insider, I've always known that people love Business Insider, but they love Business Insider. The outreach and outpouring was so warm and wonderful and had a huge range of reactions, some of which were kind of funny. Some people were like, Barbara, finally, like, we've just been waiting for you guys to do this. To others that said, just to be clear, never stopped calling you Business Insider. And, I am so proud because it's only 6 to 9 months ago about how far we've come here. And one of our strengths at Business Insider is our metabolism for change, how quickly it can move. We are no longer a startup, but we keep that ethos and culture. And to your point about, subscriptions and how it's going, for engagement, we're well beyond where we wanted to be and thought we'd be at this point. Our subscriptions are healthy and growing. So we just launched a new AI-powered paywall that is driving 75% more subscriptions than our old paywall. We're cooking with fire now. So I'm like, yeah, woo, that feels good.
But to follow up on that, just explain to us what the business model, the strategy is. Do you want to be a subscription-first company? Do you want to be an advertising-based company? Like, what is the direction?
Yeah. For us, it is not subs or ads, it's subs and ads. We really think that that is the most efficient way to build an enduring business insider. And, our pivot has really been thinking about subs and our core users and loyal users and really engaging them.
Mark Thompson, there was a report out a few weeks ago that suggested as CNN goes through this journey of trying to figure out its digital revolution, there would be a lot of job cuts. Should we anticipate CNN job cuts?
Well, I think, from day one at CNN, I've talked about the inevitability of change at CNN. I want to say I think you're going to see a lot of change, and that includes investment and new hiring. We also need to make sure that as our economics change, that we're deploying capital across what we do as smartly as we can. I haven't got anything to say at the moment on what that means in detail, but we're looking at the total economics of the company and what leaning more deeply into the experience of CNN in environments which are where most people now get their news, smartphone, podcasting and speakers, of course the web, and also still domestic and international television. But this is more about thinking quite deeply about audiences, how we serve them best, and then looking at what we've got and how we deploy what we've got in a way to get the biggest firepower out of our assets. But to be clear, the Clarissa Ward's in the audience. The ability of CNN to deploy on the world's great stories, to be fair, absolutely like the New York Times and on the right story, Business Insider, but to be on the ground first with some of the best journalists in the world and bringing that across all of these platforms live to audiences around the world is our raison d'etre. And what we're not going to do is kind of blunt the tip of that spear. We stand for news or we stand for nothing at CNN.
I guess the follow-up question to that, though, is time. You took the role in August 2023. We are now almost a year later.
October the 9th.
October the 9th. Well, you were announced in August 2023.
I'm starting month 9 at the moment. So it's which I know in as it were in media coverage is, endless time. I think we're moving quite fast at the moment.
So when should we expect some sort of new product on the sub side?
Well, I think you could. I would certainly hope by the end of this year there are meaningful things out in the market that you can see which represent change.
That's helpful and that's exciting. I look forward to understanding and seeing those. Mark Penn, one of the studies that Axios has done with one of your companies, Harris Poll, has suggested that news avoidance is really high on the consumer side right now. Part of that has to do with wars. Part of that has to do with 2 incumbents in an election. How does that impact how brands are thinking about advertising against news?
Well, it is kind of interesting because, Americans don't like to read about foreign news. Americans really like to read about themselves. And so it's like I'm always intrigued by the polling in which there's so much knowledge, information, and coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, and which is important to me, frankly. And then I asked, what's the most important issue in the country? And people, 2%, say that Israel-Hamas war. So what they're really saying is inflation, immigration, crime, and are really the issues that they care about. And they're very clear about that. Look, I think we ran out of political primaries. Those things got decided earlier than ever before and earlier than we expected. Then there's kind of a lull in the political season. I don't think there's a hesitance. One of the things I have a political game called 270. You can play it anytime you want. But it's a good barometer. When it's going down, people are losing interest. When it's going up, people are gaining interest because they look for the game. So I gained like 1,000 players a day. As soon as Donald Trump was convicted, it started to go up. people got interested. This debate, and every Republican candidate had a record fundraising day. This debate is now going to trigger or rekindle tremendous interest, I think, in the election. I think there'll be maybe $100 million raised, off of that debate. I'll be curious to see what the audience level is on that debate, but I think that kind of rekindles the election that otherwise was going to be a dead topic until the conventions.
I want to get
Sara. Can I just add something? I don't want to let the point sort of land and stop that people are fatigued about news. I want to give a couple of counterfactuals to that I think everybody should understand. First, we have 10.5 million subscribers at the New York Times. They're highly engaged. The majority of that engagement is news. So I want to say that. And news is broadly defined, but it includes politics and geopolitics and the Supreme Court and every other serious topic. I think it is a falsehood to suggest the American public, the global public does not care about civic life, civic issues. And that is no longer culturally relevant. And we should not confuse political divisiveness with people not being interested in the things happening around them. That's one. I think that is doing a disservice to the consumer. Two, just to put some data around it, we track at the New York Times very, very closely how many people read 50 or more stories a week, how many people read 100 or more stories a week. And those, I see a hand go up in the front row. Show me your hands if you read more of them. Very good. But those numbers are going up. Those numbers are going up.
Big international stories, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, head to head with domestic stories. They perform very well. So in other words, I think it's a difference between what do people vote on, pocketbook issues, personal jeopardy or fears or personal ambitions, and what do they think is important in terms of understanding what's going on in the world. And it's not quite as bleak as Mark says. And actually, I would say that generally, for CNN, the international side of what we do, I regard as a strength, and partly because a lot of other broadcasters don't trust international news. It's a point of distinctiveness and competitive advantage. Now, I mean, I would say, I'm sure Meredith would say exactly the same thing about the New York Times. It's because less people can afford to do it, less people trust in it because they've lost their confidence. If you are prepared to lean into it, invest in it, it's actually an advantage, I think.
Mark, I want to come back to you about something that Mark Penn referenced, which is the debate. CNN has that debate on June 27th.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah,
you've noticed it. Tell me, what should we expect format-wise that is different that CNN is doing to ensure that this debate goes well?
Well, I mean, I want to say that rightly or wrongly, what we wanted, in fact, what I wanted was an absolutely classic debate. I mean, Kennedy-Nixon, really. So the two candidates in a TV studio, no audience, a couple of moderators, and then just to have at it over 90 minutes for on questions about policy and the direction of America, both its future domestically and also interacting with the rest of the world. So what we're hoping for is a moment where Americans and worldwide audiences who are maybe not focused on this event will begin to focus on it and maybe be more likely to vote whoever they vote for.
And just to follow up on that, did the campaigns consult you in that format? Was that CNN making that decision unilaterally?
The format is our format, and it was the invitation was to take part in that format, in that studio on that day with those moderators. And there's been no variation in the format from first to last. So there's been a little bit of social media stuff suggesting that we have been varying the format. That's not the case. We've kept it absolutely the same right from the start.
Do you have a ratings expectation?
Look, I want to say we decided it was the right thing to do to allow any members of the Washington pool to broadcast. So many different services and different online providers. I would say that I noticed the very good ratings that the State of the Union got earlier this year, and I think these set-piece events where you can see one, or in this case, for the first time, both candidates up close, I think there will be intense interest, as Mark suggested, and I would have thought, therefore, a big audience domestically. I also think we're going to see amazingly high levels of interest in other countries. I mean, this is an election which American citizens get to vote in, but in many ways it's an election for the world, which will impact on the world. And I think you're going to see a great deal of attention on pretty much on every continent on Earth.
And then let me just say, I applaud you. I actually think the format is good, the lack of audience, the cutting off of the mics. I mean, people are sick and tired of this being. One day I always tell people, when you're depressed about politics, go back and watch the Kennedy-Nixon debates, see what politics was really like when people talked about the issues. And I do think one day there will be journalists from more than one network, once again on the same stage, asking questions. And I want to follow up on Meredith's point. I have a classification in our polls. You're either a news junkie, a sports junkie, an entertainment junkie, or a couch potato. Okay? So about 50% of the country are one of those junkies. Some of them are multiple junkies, right? And about 23% of the country are news junkies, meaning they check news 5 or more times a day. So that is an incredibly interested audience. Yeah. So are sports junkies, or there wouldn't be Sports Beach. And like I said, about half the country, I don't know what they do, but they don't.
And Sarah, just one last point about the debate, if you forgive me, is something I said yesterday. It is like a sporting event. It's like a heavyweight boxing match. We can get the ring ready, we can get the ref ready, we can get the lighting and the sound and all of that. What happens is going to be up to the two candidates. So, like everyone else, I'll be in the control room waiting to see what happens.
We have just a few minutes, so we need to get through 2 more topics. I want to talk about AI. Barbara, there's been a lot of pushback from the Business Insider Union on your company's declaration to invest in AI. Is the labor tension around AI something that you are paying attention to? Will that influence your strategy?
So, Sarah, just to put a little context around that, is recently the union had asked us and put forward a couple of examples where our journalism wasn't necessarily cited in the right way and was attributed to other outlets. And I have to say, I not only appreciated them, raising that, but 2, we had the same exact goals, which is, for our relationship with OpenAI, which I'm very proud of because I think it very much set the precedent that, us as news organizations need to be compensated for our work. There is value there, and I think that's very important. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that anytime you do something new, a new technology, it is not going to be perfect. There is a difference between progress and perfection does not exist. And in order to figure out and really actually be curious, actually be innovative, you need to pick your head up and keep your eye on the horizon and work through it. So actually, those citation issues, we're launching on the technical side with OpenAI, and they'll be fixed very shortly.
Meredith, Barbara's parent company, Axel Springer, opted to strike a deal with OpenAI. The New York Times obviously sued OpenAI and Microsoft. Why did you make that decision? And can you give us any details or insights into why you think you have a strong case?
We made the decision because they took our stuff, they used it without our permission, and they're building products that ultimately have the potential to be substitutive to ours and compete with us. Let me say some things broadly about our perspective on AI and on technology generally and what it can do. First, I am optimistic that AI, when used in, and built in lawful ways and used in responsible ways, it can make all the things I described before, high quality journalism and recipes and shopping advice and sports information and games, way more accessible to people. And I'm optimistic that the Times, which has a great track record of embracing technology to really build audience and really build engagement and really bring people the pursuit of truth in every dimension of their lives, that we'll be able to do that. And we already have some big experiments out. You can now listen to an automated voice read you the majority of the New York Times every day right in our app. We are experimenting with Spanish translation with AI augmenting what human beings are already doing, and that is going very well. Imagine the Times in every language. We've got an ad product, actually, Mark, that goes right at sort of the idea of marketer news avoidance that can help you target in ways that go beyond first-party data to say these are the right contextual places. And I could go on all the things we're doing to experiment with driving engagement through AI and so forth. And that only gets better. At the same time, we're incredibly aware that our business is all intellectual property. And so we are prepared to do whatever it takes to see that there is permission to use our intellectual property, that we have control over it, and that there's fair value exchange for it. And the last thing I want to say is, again, the success of the New York Times over the last decade has largely been a story of two things: investing more and more and more in the human beings who do the work of high-quality journalism and expert recipes and shopping advice and so on. So investing in more and more human beings who do that, and then embracing technology to get that out to as many people as humanly possible. And I want to say, Mark Thompson made this point, we shouldn't let it, let me underline it. The number of companies that have human beings doing the things that I just described at greater and greater scale is too few and getting fewer by the day. And I think we're going to have great advantages because of that. And I think the world needs, the information ecosystem needs, and the LLM makers need more of that to make their products good.
Last quick thing. 2 questions for you, Mark Thompson. One is CNN in talks with any of the AI companies about a deal?
Yes, we are. I mean, we're open for business on the right terms. There's a lot of complexity in that. We've been watching very closely the New York Times and OpenAI court case, but yes, we are indeed talking. And more broadly, I'm very bullish about. I mean, I don't think we can hide under the bed and hope that AI is going to go away. I think it's so much a part of the future, and consumer expectations of the way they engage with every kind of media is going to be so AI infused. We have to, I think, not just regard it as a threat to be avoided or organized against. I mean, quite right to ask reasonable questions about employment and all the rest of it, but we have to lean into it, experiment, and figure out ways of getting AI to help us serve our users better.
And we're out of time, but I wanted to just make sure I asked the 3 of you something, which is there's a lot of drama at the Washington Post right now with their CEO, Will Lewis. I would love just to get your thoughts. I'll go each of you, Mark, then Barbara, then Meredith, on whether or not you think the drama that has ensued means that Will Lewis should step down, or whether or not you think that he will eventually be forced out of the role.
Well, I want to say it's very easy to turn, media, legacy media, transitional media, like the Washington Post and indeed CNN, and the New York Times, all of us. It's very easy to, enormous structural pressures are playing on our industry, and those pressures often lead to all sorts of, sudden changes, somebody's in, somebody's out. It's very easy to write it up as if we're dealing with a kind of minor Shakespeare history and all the rest of it. Honestly, it's my experience over time, what you're seeing are the birth pangs of how you get from one stage to the next stage. I can't add anything on the stuff about Will Lewis that's been in the media recently, except to say that I have to say I thought that the job he did at Dow Jones in terms of digital transformation was very impressive, and I think he is one of those people with a proven track record of taking on these difficult transitional periods and making a success of them.
Barbara, Meredith, anything to add?
I would just say that it is obviously a very tough situation, but I am rooting the Washington Post on very much.
Ditto to what you both said about Will and about the Post. And I'll just add, I think I represent all of us when I say we are rooting for everyone in high quality independent journalism to be not just a surviving business, but a thriving business. We would all rather be, good or great brands and businesses in a great market than the best brand in a tough market.
Yep. Mark, I'll let you close.
No turmoil here. Let me thank you all for coming. This has been an incredible panel. And, what can I say? The future of news. Continue to tune in on it. Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys. Thank you for
everybody.
coming.